little bit of time. No, you're not 11, 12 o'clock now. Perfect on time. Okay. I know Barbara told me that she wasn't able to come today, but she will be joining us. Welcome people as well, so. Here we go. It's a challenge, this topic. And it's even more of a challenge to me because when I chose this topic, like Purim time last year, as Pasha is always very careful about us having the whole schedule out by Pesach. I didn't know that I was gonna lose my mother over the summer. So, I think everybody has their own points of meeting it, the relationship between parents and children. The obligations of parents to children, the obligations of children to parents. And, when I chose the title, Bound by Love, Defined by Law, I think it shows that it's something that's very hard to legislate. Like you think that in an ideal world, we wouldn't need legislation at all, right? Every parent wants to do everything for their child, every child loves their parent, that's the ideal world. And how do you legislate an emotional connection? We have that question on a lot of mitzvot in the Torah. How can you tell someone to love someone, right? How do you legislate love? How do you mandate design, right? When you say lo tachmod, how do you tell someone not to want what the other person has? It's, it's something internal. So, you think it should be all natural, but on the other hand, like we've just started Sefer Breshit. Sefer Breshit is the book of dysfunctional families, right? Every one of them more dysfunctional than the next. So even though you think, we don't need the Torah to tell us don't murder, but Torah starts off with a murder, and then we don't need the Torah to tell us how parents and children should interact, but wow, there are the most bizarre interactions in Sefer Breshit that you can imagine. So the question really is, I think, hi. I think the question really is how much do we expect people to have natural innate morality, and how much do we get from the Torah? And that's a question that has been debated throughout the history of philosophy, even not just Jewish philosophy. Like, is there such a thing as innate morality? Are people built with some kind of a sense inside of them that tells them what's right and what's wrong?
You never test it because the Torah, the basis of morality is like for so many generations has existed that it's become inbuilt, but might not have been naturally inbuilt.
You're saying that maybe culture has like put it into us, but it's not naturally part of us? I don't know. Nobody knows. And it's really
but you can't test it because you can't
remove
the generations and generations and thousands of years of learned morality from to see that
Reform Judaism, I think, has absorbed.
No, I'm not talking about Torah law. I'm talking about inherent knowing whether like
before there was a Torah.
Before Torah,
is there something that's objectively moral and objectively
murder is theft and murder natural? You can't test it anymore because we've lived so many generations where the basis of Judeo-Christian morality exists. You can't even
right. So the question is before Hashem gave the Torah, what morality was there?
There's no control group.
Right.
But the control group was before.
Before.
When Cain
so the Cain and Abel and the generation of the flood and
right.
But people go against morality doesn't mean that everyone would have, it meant that a
Right.
person did.
Okay, but
No,
not a
yours
person
is
in the
wrong.
generation of the flood, it was
Right.
the,
No, agreed,
you know.
but it still didn't mean that it was, that there wasn't, that there shouldn't have been, I don't know.
Right, no, look, I'm telling you,
There's no control group.
Okay, so let's look at the first source, which is a Gemara that everybody quotes when they talk about this. It's a Gemara in Eruvin. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ilmale lo nitna Torah, hayinu lemedim tzniut me'achatur, vegezel me'nimala ba'arayot miyona. If the Torah hadn't been given to teach us morality, we could have learned it by looking at nature. We could have looked at the cat and learned tzniut, because they always cover up when they go to the bathroom, or you know, that apparently ants, I did not know this until I learned this Gemara, that ants don't steal from one another. If one of them gets a crumb, it won't take it from the other. So we could learn about gezel, about theft from the ant. Ba'arayot miyona, apparently Yonah, a dove, is very faithful to their partner. So you could learn about, you know, faithfulness and not having forbidden relations. Derech eretz mitarnegol, you could learn about Derech eretz means, you don't have that continuing in Gemara without, okay, anyway, they give a whole bunch of examples from nature. Rabbi Yochanan gives a whole bunch of examples from nature, how you could learn different qualities of morality by just looking at nature around you. So people say, well, there you say it, see it, there's morality in the world, right? Without anything before, but if you think about it on a deeper level, you could also learn murder from the lion, and you could, I mean, you could learn all kinds, something from the snake that's probably not very good, you know?
Probably lots of things.
Right.
And
So-
survival, they kill each other for survival, I mean, there is an immorality in animals also.
There is morality,
There's also an
immorality, right,
right?
right, so that's what I'm saying, that nature, you can't just say, oh, look at nature and you'll learn morality, because some things look very moral to us and some things, you know?
You don't check that you're watching the right animal for the right thing.
Exactly, so I think if you read this Gemara properly, what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is we need to use our natural moral intuition to look around us and then choose what's correct. Because we in our minds have to separate between what the snake does and what the cat does, or, you know, however you wanna read the nature, but, and so Rabbi Yochanan is saying.
And you can't think that just because you can learn one thing from a cat, you should learn everything from a cat.
Right,
Because
cats are very snobby.
No,
Yeah.
A, it's snobby, and B, I promise they will steal. They will steal any food from anyone.
Right.
So, yeah, you say, okay, the cat's really good at this, but it's not good at anything else, you know?
Right.
Every animal, there's one thing from each animal that they've taken.
Right,
It's not.
which
learning
means that you are expected to make that
a
judgment call, and that means that you have the ability to make the judgment call. So when people bring this Gemara and say, oh, you know, you could learn morality from, well, no, it's Dafka Rabbi Yochanan saying the opposite. He's saying you need to use your innate morality in order to figure out what the right things are in this world.
What's the
And
proof of innate morality?
so that's a very good question, but what, this is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, not everybody would agree with him. He's saying that if God had never revealed his will to us by giving us the Torah, then we would be responsible to learn morality on our own by looking around, but again, counting on whatever we have inside. And like I said, throughout the generations, the Jewish thinkers have debated this, and it's not a given. It's true that the Ramban and the Rambam support the idea of natural morality. Rav Sadia Gaon goes very far with it, so much so that he says that the Torah can't, that we definitely have innate morality. And before we got the Torah, we were expected to follow that innate morality. In other words, we condemn the people of the generation of the flood for their behavior, even though they weren't given any rules, because they were expected to act in a certain way. And he says, this is wild, I don't know what to do with it, I'll just lay it out here. He says if Moshe had come down with a Torah that did not reflect innate morality, we should have rejected it.
That makes sense, but it couldn't have been.
Right, obviously it couldn't have been, but he's pushing it, he's trying to show that we can't be bound by anything that doesn't match our innate morality.
And yet we have been, I think, you know. Like you know, violating Shabbat, and say, somebody non-Jewish who's drowning in a pool. That only changed because it would be a Chilul Hashem, the world. It wasn't innate within or within the law.
So, right, so the question is what our innate morality would say about that, we don't, you know. So, again, like I said, there are four basic approaches to the relationship between natural morality and Torah, and not all of them agree that there is any innate morality. So, for example, the Eish Kodesh, the Piaseczna Rebbe, he thinks the only morality there is the morality that's in the Torah. Anything else is not morality, okay? Rav Lichtenstein says,
Sometimes we have some inherent problems with that, even the time when you look at what was in Torah and you go. Like when some of the battles they're told to go and kill everyone.
right,
We in our day and age have moral issues with this. When Hashem said you go Midian, go and kill the women and children.
Amalek,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Amalek more so.
Even today, when the terrorists attack us, you know, and we send in our troops on the ground, knowing they will die, it would be easier to bomb from the air.
right,
We don't.
we don't,
So what the
because
world
we have,
think.
also because we have a certain morality.
With morality, the Torah might tell you to bomb from the air.
Right.
Right.
Especially now.
If they're Amalek, right, to kill all women and children.
Right,
These are things that, and morality develops.
right, so what Rav Lichtenstein says is that there was a certain morality. And then Hashem gave the Torah, and the Torah superseded all other morality, so now. Whatever innate morality tells you to do is irrelevant because you, as a Jew, are following the Torah. That's another way of looking at it, that's the second school of thought. The third school of thought, represented by someone called Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner, who was a Hungarian rabbi in the 19th century. What's interesting about him is that most of the Hungarians were not Zionists, he was a Zionist, he was friends with Rav Kook. And he, saying that because I'm gonna relate to his opinion and Rav Kook's opinion. He says there's Torah morality, but there's other morality that's not found in the Torah. And it's even more binding maybe, because it's like an innate part of us. There are certain things that we're expected from our morality to do, and certain things from the Torah that we're expected to do. And Rav Kook kind of takes that
Is there an
idea.
example of something that is inherent morality that is like that he says is not in Torah? Like I'm interested to know what like.
Well, I'm gonna leave that question because we're gonna get to the beginning of our sugya and we're gonna talk about that, okay? Rav Kook has, I think, the most broad maybe definition. He says that the Torah includes all of morality. If you properly understand the Torah, you will have all the things you need, but the Torah doesn't supplant natural morality, it builds on it. In other words, like we say, derech eretz kadma Torah, first you have to have derech eretz and then you can approach the Torah. First you have to have morality, innate morality, and with that, if you understand that, you can understand the Torah properly. If you try to understand the Torah without the prerequisite of morality, then you're going to pervert it.
Where's the test?
I suppose
Pre-Torah, what is morality?
That's really, I don't know, a big discussion. Okay,
Human beings, do we really have any morality? If you look at different peoples in the world, people that sacrifice their children, that eat human beings, that walked around naked, like Maoris, I mean.
or maybe there's, so that, I think that goes back to what Gaby was saying, that every culture has kind of influenced the morality of their
I don't think that
locality.
naked necessarily is immoral.
Well, clearly not, because Adam and Chava were naked and that was fine until it wasn't fine.
But I do believe that sacrificing your children
Is universally,
should be universal.
should be universally not
But
okay.
like there were religions who believed that makes God happy and that's what you're supposed
Yeah.
Right.
to do, and I don't know that they were immoral people who necessarily
No,
beat their
no,
children or, you know.
you have to, I once, I I have a cousin who's a guide and he does very in-depth tours, like they're not just, like here's this, here's that, but he explains like the whole history behind. And he took us once to Gay Ben Hinnom and he explained the concept of Molech, which is, sacrificing your children and how it would work and how you could like, because it seems so foreign. But he explained how it was done in stages, and he would start with a small sacrifice, and the sacrifice would improve, right? So they would tell you bring a bigger sacrifice, and your whole, life was at risk because you had no rain, and your farm, all your children were going to die because you had no food. And then the final stage of it was they told you, well, if you give one child, you'll save the rest of them. So like you can see where it's not so simple as, oh my God, they're sacrificing their children. There's a
So,
perverse but a logic to it.
so, in maybe our innate, morality is the seven Noahide laws. But the seven Noahide laws, who knows about them? We talk about them.
We thought about
Who
that.
knows
There
about
actually is a very large movement now of non-Jews following the Noahide laws. It's interesting.
So that's a
I think it's
basic
part of,
morality.
if you ask me, in my, own worldview, it's part of, the
But
goyim coming around
the
to.
people who follow more than that, the people who follow, like non-Jews who follow like some Torah laws beyond this.
Well, like we just had with Charlie Zeh, that he kept Shabbat, but.
He was doing it from a logical.
A logical point of
point
view, right?
I get that,
No,
because
but he-
switching off a day is just a logical.
Right.
It didn't matter which day. I'm sure he would have become a Jew in the end because he changed it. It wasn't that. It wasn't.
No, he was 100% Christian.
No,
It was
but
an
he
interesting
changed it
student.
out for Sunday, so
Right.
it was a bit.
She
Right.
was even on
No, it was the concept, but yeah.
But it is.
Anyway, so now I started off with these lofty ideals, which again, like you said, this has been discussed for generations and centuries and whatever, and nobody's ever gonna get to any kind of agreement on this, but I wanted to bring that in. We have to look at the Gemara, our topic in the Gemara where we start about the relationships between the obligations of parents to their children. We have to see how our tradition translate these lofty ideals into more concrete halachic terms, in terms of what we're going to expect of the parents in their care. So this course is going to cover really two aspects of the parent-child relationship. We're starting with the parent's obligations to the child. After that, we'll be doing the child's obligation to the parent, which is something a little more familiar because we talk a lot about kibbud horim. But that's where we're going to start with the parents to the child. And we're going to see, and this is something we saw a lot last year, the division between the halacha and the agadah in the Gemara. Now, the Gemara has two components to it. The halacha are the halachic statements, the agadah are the can't think of the word in English right now, the stories, and allegorical, thank you, allegorical, the allegorical part. So the halacha represents the side of obligation. The allegory, it goes in all kinds of more theoretical ways. So the halacha on the side of obligation kind of grows out of what we learned last year, those of you who were there, about tzedakah, right? Because our obligations to others, our obligation of tzedakah works at concentric circles, starting from our family to our city to our nation. So if we're starting in the family, we're going to expect that a parent would take care of their children before they would send them out to beg on the street, right? And it's also based on the legal obligations of marriage. What is a husband required to provide for his wife? What is a husband required to provide for the family? Now, what's interesting about our sugya, about this topic, is that in most cases, the Gemara very much focuses on the halacha, and the stories are kind of an added bonus. But when it comes down to actually making decisions like psak about what we do, the stories often get left behind. But somehow, even the poskim in our topic of parents' obligation to children, they left a space for these natural moral claims, let's say, that the stories talk about, beyond the halachic basis or minimal line that you're required to do. But instead of making the halacha obligate us in a high level of things, they kind of made a minimal level of halacha and then added the other obligations in the allegory, in the story. So the halacha kind of pulls back to leave room for the Agadah, which is very different than many other things. In terms of where we find this discussion, so the discussion of the parents' obligation to the children is in two places in the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, in the Gemara. One part, they're both in Seder Nashim, right? We have 6 Sdarim, 6 no, tractates are Masachot. There's another word for Seder in English. I don't know what it is. Anyway, the Mishnayot are divided into 6 books. Each one is on a topic.
Topics.
No, there's a word. Each one is on a different topic. Seder Nashim, about women, includes all kinds of family law, marriage law, and things like that. So obviously we would expect to find this there, but it's divided between 2 different Masechtot, 2 different tractates. One is Kiddushin. We know that in the ancient days when they had marriage, there were 2 stages to marriage. You had Kiddushin, which was the equivalent of what we would call Erusin today, engagement. That was about a year before the Nisuin, which was the actual marriage. And in that year, the couple would, get engaged, and then he would spend the year building the house and getting ready for the marriage. And there were different obligations in that year. So the Kiddushin is basically about building the house. And so anything that has to do with chinuch, about educating the children, we're going to find in Kiddushin, because it's kind of the planning of the house. How are we going to raise our children? How are we going to be a family? What kind of family, they would say, the question you're supposed to ask on a date is, what do you see your Shabbos table looking like? So what do we see our children, what do we see? How do we want to raise our children? That's going to be in Kiddushin. But in Ketubot, Masechet Ketubot, which talks about the Ketubah, which is really the financial obligation between the man and the wife. So there, we're going to talk about financial obligations, right? You have the parents' financial responsibility to the children and the mutual commitments between the husband and the wife. So today we're going to start from Ketubot, which is the financial obligations. We're going to look at the first Mishnah. Now we know that the way the Gemara works is that the Gemara goes through the Mishnayot that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote around the year 200. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi collected the Mishnayot because he saw that the oral tradition was being lost because of the persecution of the Romans, and he wrote them down. And he wrote them down because he was afraid they would get lost, but it was asur to write them down because it was an oral tradition. So what he did was he wrote it down in a very short form, kind of a mnemonic. And over the generations, even the mnemonic was not enough because the rabbis would forget what he was meant to say. So they would discuss it. They would discuss each Mishnah and then write down the discussion. And that's what we call today the Gemara. So we have the Mishnah from Rabbi Nasi around 200. We have the Gemara, which is the discussion about the Mishnah, which took place up until about the year 800 in the Bavli. So we're going to look at the Mishnah in source 2. So that's the Mishnah which appears on Ketubot Mem Tet, but would also be, if we were just looking at a book of Mishnayot, in chapter 4, Mishnah 6. So we're going to read the Mishnah. Now what we're going to do, what we always do when we're learning a new Mishnah, is we read the Mishnah with no prior understanding, and then we ask questions, just like the rabbis, the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara would have done. They would have sat there and said, okay, wait, what does that mean? Why did you say it this way? Is that what he meant? And so we're gonna first read it without any prior discussion, and then we're gonna see what kind of questions we can come up with, and then we'll see if maybe our questions sometimes match those of the Gemara, which we'll be learning for the next few weeks. Okay, ha'av eino chayav b'mizonot bito. Well, that's pretty shocking. A father is not obligated to support his daughter. Zen midrash darash Rabbi
I can
Elazar.
tell some of my daughters that.
Zen midrash darash Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. This is an explanation which Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah taught lifnei chachamim b'kerem b'yavna, in front of the rabbis in Kerem b'yavna. Okay, remember that's where the rabbis went after they let Jerusalem was destroyed. They asked for Yavna as a place to replace the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. Habanim Yirshu, v'abanot Yizon. So what did Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say in Kerem b'Yavna? That the boys inherit and the girls are supported. Ma habanim einan yorshin ela lachar mitat ha'av. The boys, when do you inherit? You inherit after the father dies. Af habanot ein nizonot ela lachar mitat avihen. So the girls will also only get supported after the father passes away.
Before.
Okay, so what are our questions on this? It's a very odd.
So what's the difference between inheriting and being supported?
Okay, and
why is there a difference between boys and the girls?
there's always a difference between boys and girls.
That's rhetorical.
At what age, and are they
Yeah.
supposed to be married here or single?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Who are we talking about? Are we talking about infants? Are we gonna leave babies on the street with no food?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
And does a person's actions have any consequences, a relationship? One took care of the parents and, yeah, that could be.
In other words, is there some kind of quid pro quo? Like if
The
you,
before was supposed to receive like a double amount, right, because he was supposed to take care of the parents, but maybe in reality he didn't, or, that is.
so you're saying if they cared for the parents, maybe the parents will care for them more as well.
But they are, I mean, if it starts off from when they're very young. Like.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what age we're talking
If
about.
it is from when they're very young, kids can't be, the children can't be
Expected to care for their
to
parents.
care for their parents.
Right.
Parents have to care for their children first, so if they're around to care for them.
Right. If you don't feed them when they're like 2, then they're not gonna get to that
They're
age.
not gonna look after you when you're old. And is it relevant that says specifically, I don't think they did all Mishnah that he said it in Kerem b'Yavna.
It's bizarre. You are completely right. It's very out of context that like out of the normal formation of a Mishnah. Remember, Mishnayot are always very concise. They don't give you extra information.
I think they come from earlier than this time, like they've been around for years, so then why specifically?
Right, it happens to be, and you are correct, and we're gonna discuss that. Why did they tell us? Like, okay, you wanna say Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said,
Yes,
but he said it in front of the rabbis in Kerem. What do I care where he said it? Like, there's something very odd about that phrasing. It stands out. Okay. Any other questions?
it's probably words specifically that, like, knowing how they use language, there's stuff in there that we wouldn't pick up, not knowing the language that they would normally use.
Okay.
And what does the marriage contract have to do with anything? They inherit, sons inherit some money specified in their mother's marriage contract, why is that relevant?
Well, that's how inheritance works.
But you specify amount in the marriage contract, it has to be a certain amount, but. Your financial situation could change drastically after the marriage.
Right, no, but then the sons inherit the amount that the wife would have gotten if she were alive. Besides the other inheritance, the splitting of whatever the father has. There are certain amounts, and remember, people often had children from different husbands, so. The sons from one wife would inherit specifically her ketubah money, and the sons from another wife would inherit her ketubah money, and then the rest of the stuff might get split amongst them.
Also, it starts out and it says, they know chayav mizonot, and then later on it says that he does,
Right,
no,
that's a good
that's
point.
contradictory.
We start with, there's no obligation, and then there is an obligation, but after death, maybe,
Right,
right? So what's going on here?
It also seems strange that the daughters get from the father's estate, whereas it's always the sons that inherit. The sons are the inheritors.
Right, so the daughters don't inherit, they get mizonot. Okay, we're gonna have to talk about what that word mizonot
sons
means,
are responsible to provide for the daughters, maybe.
The
that's not
estate.
clear.
the estate.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not.
If he dies, like,
Well, that is a very good question, so I think you read the Mishnah, it's shocking, you don't have to support your daughters, now what? I mean, they have to
all the
eat,
fathers are going, sure.
I mean, they have to eat, they need clothes, right, they need a lot of clothes, I have
And
3
you want-
daughters.
You want to be looked after so that you can marry more well, whatever,
Right.
their teeth, look after, whatever was relevant at the time.
So. I mean, it's a very difficult sugya, not because it's technically difficult, not because the Gemara discussion that we're gonna see is a difficult discussion, it's not, it's pretty straightforward, but it's just inconceivable. To say to a father, you're not responsible for supporting your children.
Who is that?
What is that, right? I know, a Jewish parent, it's it negates our most basic conception of what a parent is to a child. So, I mean, and you can try and give historical explanations, families were different then, and they had a lot of
Baby
children and
was
many
the
died.
baby.
Hmm?
The baby was the baby.
I don't really buy that, they try and say, they had children because they needed them to work the land, and you counted on, X percentage of them dying in infancy, so you didn't get attached. I think a family is still a family, and there's plenty of stories in the Gemara about people mourning their children, and I don't think that's a really legitimate. Excuse for all of this, yes, they had mortality hanging over their head more than we did, their lifespans were
So
We're
I think
shorter,
that
they're-
should stand in bed to the best of their ability to stop that happening.
right. So yeah, I don't buy that. So our Mishnah, it deals with how much a father is required to pay a mizonot, right? And normally we translate mizonot as child support today, if someone gets divorced, right? You have to decide on how much mizonot he's gonna give to the wife if she has custody of the children, right? But the term mizonot is used a few different ways in this masechet. And the primary meaning of mizonot is not the one that we think of in modern Hebrew, and that's something we always have to be careful about when we're learning texts from 1,500 years ago, is that our use of Hebrew is not always the same as their use of Hebrew. And mizonot, the primary meaning of it is the money that the husband allots to the wife during the marriage, not in a divorce, in a normal marriage. What they would call the housekeeping fund or whatever it is. We know that a husband is obligated in the ketubah to support his wife, and I know today things are a little different, but we have to think in the head that they were in then. Look in source 3. It's a pasuk from Shmot. Im acheret yikach lo. Let's say a man is married and he wants to take a second wife, which in Sefer Shmot is still okay.
He has that trouble in his life.
Right. Now today it's not okay, but let's say she'erak sutav onata lo yikara. He cannot take another wife if he can't support the first one in the way that he was meant to support her. She is supposed to get she'era, her food, suta, her clothing, the onata, her conjugal rights. If he is going to take on another wife and that's going to affect her, then he is not allowed to take on a second wife. Those are undeniable rights. So there are obligations of the husband when they're married, even before, or hoping that we don't get to a divorce, but mizonot is not just what's paid after the divorce, but it's also something within the context of a marriage. In most healthy homes, bills are paid in a dynamic fashion, whatever your agreement is. I know there are people that keep separate accounts, have united accounts or whatever it is, but you don't necessarily have this concept, but the original idea was that that he had to take upon himself the obligation to make sure that there were enough funds for all of these things. Now, even today, after a divorce, then we have to make these decisions in a set fashion. Even if you're, in a marriage, a healthy marriage, these things kind of flow and people make decisions about spending money together or however. Once there's a divorce, then we have to make decisions how much money is going towards child support and how much money is going towards alimony and all those kinds of things. So then we can see that the father's given his, set child support, and that's called mizonot. So then people in modern Hebrew, and then people think that that's what we're talking about. So all the obligations of the father to the family are set in Masechet Ketubot, where we're learning in the 4th and 5th chapter. We're in the 4th chapter now, and people look at it in different ways. Some people say, okay, why did Ketubot have to lay out all these rules about how to run the family? It's kind of a sign of a failure of the family, because you would hope that a natural relationship would develop in which they could make decisions. I don't think that's necessarily true. So like that the Mishnahs bring these kind of b'diavad, like in the case where you can't function normally, you need these rules. I don't think that's true. I think everybody needs boundaries of what a normative household should be, according to the Chachamim. It teaches us what the values of the Chachamim were. If we want to set up a home that's based on Torah values, we want to see what their opinions were in these things as well. And it's just as important as the rules of kashrut or tarat mishpacha. Financial management is really important. I mean, we see this with young couples today. It's a really important lesson for them to learn. And sometimes people are really clueless. Especially the young couple, they get married and they don't really understand how you run a house.
Their first time going to the supermarket, and they go, why didn't you tell me how expensive it was?
It's kind of like, as New Orleans, when you come to an Israeli thing and you don't know what the rules are, like you get to some tekes for the chayalim and every other mother has come with every pot in her closet full of food, and you're sitting there with like a bag of Cheetos and you're like, oh, I missed a clue here.
Yep.
So we want to give them, that young couple, a boundary. So we can't assume that every mother will naturally know how to nurse her baby, right? Even though in the wild the animals do, and even though that's what we assume she wants to do, all of these things are boundaries that Chazal are giving us. And the language of Mishnah is an obligation, but it's really supposed to be teaching us more of a values lesson. And so it's a way for the Mishnah to take the derech eretz, the way of the world, and put it into Torah. That's how I see it. Okay. Okay, so what it means that we want to explore the values that all of these rules portray. And so we look at that first sentence of our Mishnah and we say, the father is not required to pay mizonot for his daughter. Whoa. What is that trying to tell us? And it seems to contradict every basic thought that we could possibly have, right? And I think that goes back to what Gaby said, that Zeh Midrash Darash Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Lifnei Chachamim B'Kerem B'Yavne, that very strange phrase that they put in. It's very rare for the Mishnah to put that in, and I think that it's expressing its discomfort. Like, I'm going to say something and I don't feel comfortable saying it, so I'm going to tell you exactly how it was said, because I have like proof that it was actually said. So and so said it here before these people.
I don't know.
I don't like it. Right. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. If I turn on the air conditioner a little, it's like very stuffy in there. Or open a window or something. Oh, wow. Okay. So that's the question at the base of the opening of our sugya. That we now will have to understand the requirements and the zchuyot of the parents for their children. Now, what I do want to say at the very beginning, which is another thing you guys brought up, before we dive into the Gemara on our Mishnah and see what they asked about, we have to define who we're talking about, because yes, the Gemara does recognize that there's a big difference between an infant and a married child. So basically in halacha, we divide, well, there's other divisions, but let's say in this context, we're going to divide into 3 categories of children. There are what's called ktanei ktanim, like really little ones. That's 0 to 6. And we're gonna talk about those now. Then there are ktanim. That's 6 to maturity, 12 or 13. And then there are adults, 12 or 13 and up, married children. Those are 3 very different categories and 3 very different halachot. Okay, 0 to 6, 6 to bagrut, and above bagrut, above maturity.
Even our definitions of them are different now, we would not consider a 12-year-old.
Right. Well, that's always the question. When we say a 12-year-old, you're now an adult woman, right? Right.
Not an 18-year-old.
100%. Okay.
Guys.
Ay, let's not go there. Okay, so according to all the commentators, our Mishnah is talking about children that are already weaned. Weaned in halacha, in theory, you nurse until 2, Chaf Dalet Chodesh, 24 months, but you're considered attached to the mother until the age of 6. Okay, so our Mishnah is not talking about those. I just want to show you a little bit about the literature about that age. So according to all, there's a complete requirement to take care of children up to the age of 6. So first of all, you can take a deep, breath, because that already sounds a lot better. If you look at the Rambam in source 4, so he tries to prove it backwards from the divorcee. Agrusha ein la mizonot, af al pi shehi menika et bina, of a divorcee who is nursing a child, the ex-husband's child. She doesn't get mizonot because there is no alimony in Judaism. She gets paid her ketubah. But aval noten la yoter al schara dvarim shakatan sarif lahen. He pays her wages as a nursemaid. In other words, he pays her for nursing because she is providing a service to him by feeding his child, and he provides whatever the child needs. Dvarim shakatan sarif lahen, miksut, clothing, ma'achal, mashke, food, drink, sikha, any kind of creams he needs, chayotze bazeh.
And that doesn't differentiate between girls and boys.
No. Aval mu'uberet ein la klum. A pregnant woman doesn't get anything extra because she isn't providing any service to him yet. Once she has the baby, another. Okay. Shalu chadashav. Now he finished the 24 months. Ugmalto, and he is weaned. If the divorcee wants to keep the son, which she has the right to do, there is no custody for the father if the mother doesn't want it before 6. You force the father, he must support the child till the age of 6, and she can hold on to him, and he has nothing to say. After 6 years, once now the mother can choose to keep him after 6, but the father doesn't have to support him. Okay, the father can say, if I take the child, I will feed him, but if you take the child, then it's on you. You chose. The father can never take the daughter, only the son. So that's the Rambam. And we learned this age of 6. Where does the Rambam get it from? From our Masechet in Ketubot, just a few pages after where we're learning now. Darash Rabbi Ula Rabba Apitcha Debei Nasi. Rabbi Ula, the great Darash, he gave this drasha at the door of the Nasi. Now, what's weird about that? It sounds exactly like our Mishnah, right? About the drasha being given where and when. So there's something that they're making a parallel here. Says Rabbi Hula Rabba, even though our Mishnah says you don't feed the children, they don't mean the little children. The little children, 6 and under, you feed. Ad kama, ad ben shesh, kid Rabbi Asi. And Rabbi Asi was the one who established this level of 6. The Amar Rav Asi, katan ben shesh yotzei be'evu v'imo. And how does Rav Asi express this idea of 6? He says that okay, there's the concept of eruv tchumim. Have you heard of that? Okay, if you're in a place where you want to leave civilization, you want to leave the city that you're in, you're allowed to walk 2,000 amot out of the city on Shabbat. Not allowed to walk farther, that's your tchum. But you can set up, I'm sure some people done like Shabbat Bateva or things like that, you set up like a food station along the way. And that extends, so that makes that part of your civilization, and then your 2,000 starts from there. Okay, so if the mother sets one up and the father sets one up, the child can go with the mother in her direction, he can't go with the father in his direction until he's 6 years old, because he's attached, like the child until the age of 6, Rav Asi says it's attached to the mother. Whatever she determines, it determines everything that he does.
I assume that kind of thing, that if the mother had God forbid died or whatever, because death and childbirth was very common. Then he couldn't go with the father, or could not.
Right, no, obviously, if there is no mother, there's
the mother's the primary parent.
Right, obviously, if there's no mother, then the discussion is different. So all of this appears in a discussion of the obligation of the mother to breastfeed. And therefore, if she's obliged to breastfeed the baby, to feed the baby, he's obliged to pay for whatever extra costs taking care of the baby have to her. And we can see in source 6, that is the parallel Gemara from the Talmud, from the Jerusalem Talmud. Remember that the Gemara was written in 2 different places at the same time. One Gemara was written in Babel, and one was written in Israel, not in Jerusalem, in those called the Jerusalem Talmud. It was actually written in the Galil by the rabbis who were living in Israel at the time. And here it says, Amar Rabbi Hula, Matnita Amra Kain, Sheyehei Adam Zane Banav Ktanim. Right, the Mishnah says that a man has to feed his small children, like the underage children. The Taninan Taman, Im Hayta Medika Pochatin La Mimaseh Yadeha Mosifin La Al Mezonoteha. So another thing that we learn is that if she's nursing, not a divorcee, but a wife, her work obligations are lower. In other words, whatever her deal is in the house, I'll do the dishes, you'll take care of the car, whatever it is that, decided between the couple, you have to take something off of her, because the nursing, she needs extra energy and she needs more food. So we see that all of this is in the context of what she's providing by nursing. And then when they take from the nursing, then they kind of widen out to the general topic of supporting the child, even when they're not nursed. So then there's a whole discussion among the Parshanim, among the commentators, how we understand that. So one way of looking at it is the father has to feed the mother, and the obligation to feed the child is an extension of the obligation to the mother. And other people say, no, it's a direct obligation of the father to the son, and we'll see later on that this can affect things, right? Because if you were divorced, let's say, so the father no longer has an obligation to the mother, so does he still have an obligation to the child? If you say that the only obligation the father has is through the mother, then he no longer has to support the child. Obviously, that the halacha wasn't decided because I saw the Rambam, but that's the theoretical discussion that goes on. Exactly, what's the nature of the obligation of the father to the child? Is it through the mother, or is it independent of that? And again, we keep going over to the question of divorce and marriages that didn't work and how we have to make these decisions, but within a normal, functioning, happy marriage, these are decisions that have to be made also. There are always priorities that we're going to have to pick. The wife wants to go back to work, right? She wants to stop nursing so she can go back to work. How are we gonna make this work within the family, right? What kind of decisions do we have? In the older days, that would mean you'd have to hire a witness, so you'd have to pay someone, now you have to pay for formula, like, these are decisions that the couple has to come to together, so they're legitimate. Even within a normative family. I brought here a source because really what it comes down to here, when you're discussing questions of this type of, the wife wants to go back to work and the husband wants her to stay home with the kids. It goes back to the whole question of the primary, how the Torah sees a woman and what her primary purpose is. And there's a parshan called Rabbanit, he lived in the 15th century in Spain. He wrote such a beautiful commentary on this that I had to bring in. It's based on the pasuk when Rachel and Yaakov, when Rachel is unable to have children, and she turns to Yaakov and she says, Haba li banim b'mayin meta anochi. Bring me children, or if not, I'm dead. It's as if I'm dead, right? And then Yaakov gets very angry at her. And if you look at source 7, I think it's on your page, the Akedah Yitzchak has such a beautiful parshanut of this. He says, "V'hinei b'shnei hashemot, Isha and Chava, nitba'er Isha shtei tachiyot." The fact that when woman was created, she was given 2 names, Isha and Chava. It means that every woman has 2 purposes in life. That she's the woman parallel to the man. In other words, it's just another type of person. And just like he can, she too will understand and be intellectual and spiritual. Very amazing that someone says this about a woman in the 15th century. Just like our imahot were very intellectual, spiritual people. And there were women who were tzadikot, and there were women who were neviot. The kasher yoreb shat parshat eshet chayil, just like we sing in eshet chayil about this woman who does everything. She's an eshet chayil. She can have business and smart and beautiful and all of these things, right? So she's a person who has a function in the world, is adding to the world in terms of her intellect and her abilities. So that's the Isha. V'hasheni, the second aspect of a woman, inyan ha'holada, and that's the ability to give birth. Ve'ota kli elaha umudba'at ela leida v'gidul habanim. The fact that she has the power to have children and raise her children. Kasher Yoreh Hashem Chava, Ein Kol Chai, and that's indicated by the name Chava, which is explained as Ein Kol Chai, the mother of all living. V'hinei tiyeh isha kasher lo telei. Now he's going to the story of Rachel, but he's saying a woman who can't give birth, minua me'atachlit hakatan hasheni. Okay, so a woman who can't give birth, she's prevented from doing that second small task. What's the small task of the woman? The giving birth one. So she is equivalent still to the man who will do good in the world and will do bad in the world. She still functions as a full human being. She's just lost out on the addition of Chava. And it's said about those people who can't have children. Yad Vashem Tov Mibanim Ubanot. It says in Yeshayahu that you will have a better name, something even better than the sons and daughters. Because in the end, what people leave behind, what is their legacy? It's not necessarily their children, but it's their good actions. So that's why Yaakov got so angry at Rachel when she said, he got angry at her. And he wanted to educate her and say to her, Shehi eina meta lefi hatachlit hamishutav. They still have the same purpose in life. She has as much of a purpose as he does. He just never had the added purpose. Basher manami mena pribet, and the God prevented her from having children. Moshe yebo ha'inyan gam kain im lo yolid. And same thing would be if he never had any children. It's a very, I mean, there's a lot to say about this, but it's, if you think about it in the context of 15th century, of a rabbi getting up and saying, women aren't all about giving birth, women are people. And they're people just like men are people, and they're even better than people, because they have a second purpose, and that's the ability to give birth, but a woman can't give birth. She's still equivalent to man. It's shocking, I mean, it's amazing, amazing perush, right? So I think that we see that also here, like we're always deciding between these, you know, as women and even modern women, we have to make decisions about which tachlit we're choosing at the moment, which purpose we're prioritizing at the moment. So we have to juggle these priorities, and I think that also comes very much into play in these rules, and I think some of them are very much protecting the woman. Giving her the option to choose, which is again, for the time that it was written in, very forward
That's very
thinking.
technical often, but I think that if it didn't exist, women could just be abused. Like certainly in other cultures, like you didn't have to provide, so, right?
Right,
So however hard that against nature it feels, sometimes it has to be that way.
right. So so that was one example of how we see that the, you know. I took it off on a thing, but I love this topic, that children from the age of 6 and below are considered part of the mother. Another example I brought you here in source 8 is that, it says, Nashim abadim uktanim pturim min hasukah. Just went through this, women, slaves, and small children are patur from the sukkah, they're exempt. Katan she'eino tzarich li'imo chayav. Child who doesn't need his mother should be in the sukkah. What does that mean? Katan she'eino tzarich li'imo, it means someone over the age of 6. Once they're over the age of 6, they're considered ready to be educated, and they should be doing chinuch mitzvot. They should be taken into the sukkah and explain what it is. And obviously we do that from a younger age, but that is the age that it starts from. And in the source 9, which I brought you, which is long, and I don't think we have time to read it through, but it's a beautiful Gemara about a person who I think is very interesting, Rabbi Yoshua ben Gamla. Rabbi Yoshua ben Gamla was a Kohen Gadol. And what he is famous for, well, he's famous for a few things, but one of the things he's famous for was a takana that he made, that there should be schools very forward thinking in his time. That 2000 years ago, he said that all kids should be in school, and they should all be in school from the age of 6. Which is rather
Actually, it's changed.
very little has changed. So he says that it used to be. Here, I'll really be a little bit of it because I love this Gemara. Dama Rav Yehuda Rav. I'm in the second paragraph. Zachor oto ha'ish latov. We remember for good Yoshua ben Gamla Shmo. His name is Yoshua ben Gamla. She'ilma lehu. If not for him, nishtakach Torah Yisrael. Torah would have been forgotten. Shebitchila misha yesh lo av milamdo Torah. In the beginning, how did it work? How were kids educated? Your father. If you had a father and he knew how to learn, he could teach you. Misha ein lo av. If you didn't have a father, or you didn't have a father who could teach you, lo yelami Torah. So you wouldn't learn Torah. Right? Hitkinu, I'm just jumping to the next paragraph. So they made a takana. Sheyu moshivim milamdei tinokot b'Yerushalayim. So they made schools. They had teachers in Yerushalayim. Kimitzion tetzei Torah, because Torah should come out of Yerushalayim, right? Ba'adayin. How did that help? Misha yesh lo av haya ma'alo milamdo. Whoever had a father bothered to take their child to Yerushalayim to get him an education. Misha ein lo av lo haya olev milamid. So then, if you didn't have a father to take you to Yerushalayim, you still didn't learn. Hitkinu sheyu moshivin b'chol pelach b'pelach. So they said we have to have schools in every location, in every city. Umachnisin otan kiven 16 kiven 17, and 16, 17. They have to be brought in. But
To Yerushalayim?
no, to these schools, these local regional schools.
But not before 16.
Umisha haya rabo ko'es alav, mav'it bo v'yotzei, but at 16, 17, you've missed the boat. If you haven't learned till 16, 17, they get rebellious. If the teacher would get angry at them, they would just say, okay, I don't need this, and they'd get up and they'd leave, right? Ad sheba Yoshua ben Gamla, until Yoshua ben Gamla came, v'tikeh, sheyu moshivin melavdei tinokot b'chol medina u'medina b'chol ir ba'ir, not just regional schools, but every place would have a teacher, umachnisino chan keven sheish keven sheva. 6 or 7 is the age where your child can still be molded. You can't take a 17-year-old who's never been behind a plow his whole life and then tell him you have to sit down and learn to read now. It's not gonna work. But if you take a 6 or 7-year-old and you make it available to him because it's local, then education. So they say because of the Rishon Ben Levi saved learning Torah. He was the one that set up. It's an unbelievable,
It must have been very progressive those days. Where
very progressive.
other societies were doing that.
Of course not. We're the people of the book. We're the ones who prioritize learning and
Children going down mines, 18th, 19th century.
Yes,
It's
it's amazing.
it's really amazing. But again, we see, and when we're at the end of our time, but basically what we've gotten out of this class is that Judaism very much recognizes this 0 to 6 age as being completely dependent on the parents and obvious that they have to be taken care. Starting at 6, we start to take them out to the world. They go to school. They're independent. They can go to the sukkah. They can be separated from the mother. They can go with the mother or the father on Shabbat, in whichever direction they want to go. And at 6, something is changing. And that's what we're gonna pick up on next week. What do we do with the 6 to adult children and how do we support them?